Hello and welcome to the d.MBA podcast where we share business confidence with the design community. Today, as well, recently always, are with me Franz and Tom. Hey Franz, hey Tom.
Hey everyone.
Hey Alen, hey Franz.
And yeah, we are doing another business design teardown, but today it's not like a regular company, it's a bit different. But yeah, in this format, in the teardown, we look at cool products, brands, events, maybe, something that design community generally likes. And then we look at the business side of that product or service. So we want to see if this is just a fancy design or is it fancy business as well. Usually I start with asking Tom, who are we tearing down today? But maybe I can ask Franz about his t-shirt and the story behind the t-shirt.
Yes. So for everybody who is not watching us on YouTube, I'm wearing a zigzag t-shirt, white, red, grayish. And that's the newly awarded t-shirt of the Tour de France for the best research for strategy in podcasts.
And you're wearing it today.
Yeah.
So you got it. The
Means he's
leaderboard.
leading.
Exactly.
Let me ask you, are you also the only one on that leaderboard or are there more people in there?
There are countless.
Oh, okay.
Countless business podcasts.
Nice.
And I was awarded. So that's already a big hint for the company/event we're talking about today.
It is. I imagine people have guessed by now. Probably if they
Probably
clicked
in the
on this.
title.
It's in the title. It is a lovely shirt, by the way, Franz. I don't know if you can divulge which brand that is.
Secondhand. I don't even know what brand it is.
Thrifter. So today's teardown is a bit different, as Alan mentioned. Today we're going to be tearing down an event, the Tour de France. This is a really good suggestion to mix things up from Alan, actually, who, as I'm sure will become clear as we get through this podcast, is something of a Tour de France nerd. We'll see how we go. A bit. Recent Slovenian winner might have helped. I don't know whether your interest was there beforehand.
We'll get into the story, right?
Such a success fan.
The Tour de France. We always say that learning about business, learning about economics, a good way to do that is to find something you're passionate about. And lots of people are very passionate about the sports they love. Great way to learn about business. I think, Alan, we talked about in the past, when you wanted to learn about the financial side of business, you started looking up Premier League teams, kind of understand how they operate, how they make money. And if you can find something that you're really passionate about, and a lot of us really love sport, great way to learn about this stuff. So today, quite timely, because the Tour de France is on at the moment. It's the one we're tearing down today. So it might take a few different twists and turns, excuse the pun, than our usual teardowns. It's not a product, it's not really a brand per se, but super fascinating. So Tour de France, for those that don't know, is, I think it's worth saying, probably the most grueling of sporting events. The people who compete in it are sort of superhuman, sometimes super enhanced. We might touch on that a little bit. Takes place over 21 stages across France, usually about 23, 24 days, but racing on 21 of those across all kinds of areas of France. The particularly grueling bits are across the Pyrenees, in the mountains. We'll touch on some of the unique attributes of the race later on in the teardown. First organised in 1903. It's been held annually ever since, apart from during the First World War and Second World War. And the origin story is fascinating. It was started as a way to increase sales of a newspaper called Loto, or Loto. My French pronunciation, I'm so sorry for anyone.
That's going to happen on regular basis throughout this podcast.
My apologies.
Pronouncing French names in the wrong way. And so
I'm from
on.
East London. I sound terrible at the best of times, let alone doing French pronunciation. I sound like a character from a British comedy called Only Fools and Horses, Del Boy, when I'm trying to do French. But it was founded by L'Auto as a way to boost sales of the newspaper. So they put together the first Tour de France as a way of promoting the newspaper. It was the way that you would find out about results, about things that were happening in the area. And it had an enormous impact for them. Like they would sell hundreds of thousands more copies during the tour. It was a real big income stream. And actually it ended up, a lot of other competitor papers just fell away, went out of business because they were able to just gobble up all of the competition. So yeah, really interesting way that it emerged, and it's really interesting that it has a business-centered origin story. And it really reminded me of the Michelin Guide as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if you thought that.
Yeah.
So Michelin Guide started...
Seems to be a French thing.
A French thing, right?
To start, yeah.
Start a business to try and sell more of your things. So the Michelin Guide was started to encourage people to drive more, to use more consumables, to get out in their car more. And now, something completely unrelated from motoring.
Yeah,
so
now the byproduct is maybe more famous than the main product.
Exactly.
For both of these.
Indeed. So, yeah, enormous sporting event. Much bigger, actually, than I realised. Alan blew my mind when we were discussing potentially doing this, that the Tour de France is the world's most watched sporting event. Do you know how many viewers, chaps? 3.5 billion. That's an awful lot of people. I thought the World Cup, FIFA World Cup, would be number one, but that's got a measly 3.3 billion. But yeah, absolutely crazy, blew my mind. And the economics of the Tour de France are fascinating. That's what we're going to explore today, from the sponsorship to the famous advertiser parade, to the local sort of French state funding models, where different areas pay to be part of the tour. And of course, the enormous television rights in order to have that enormous audience that we talked about. So it's an absolute money-making machine, generates hundreds of millions in revenue each year. And I'm really looking forward to taking a deep dive. So why the Tour de France? So we've already said that learning about a sport or something you're passionate about is a great way to learn about business. But it does seem to me, and I don't know if this is just anecdotal in the UK or in my group, that cycling seems to be a sport that a lot of the design community are really into. They seem to relate to more than others. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because a sort of solo thing, or there's a kind of mechanical element to it.
Cyclists are stylers.
What's that?
Cyclists are stylers.
Stylers.
Just have a look at I'm not a cyclist. I'm like running, mountaineering. But whenever I see a cyclist on their bike, I look at them and like, styler. Like, everything looks perfect. Styled bike, styled shoes, styled everything. Like, they look like straight out of a fashion magazine.
Right. You can
maybe in Austria it's not the case here. No, really. No way.
Seriously, like that's crazy here. Like, I moved from Vienna to Salzburg. Already Vienna had like obviously huge commuter scene. So here you had people on bikes that looked sleek because they were going to bars and to like commuting to work. But now I live in Salzburg, so there's a lot more like cycling for sports. And these people, they look like out of like you could take them and put them into a shop for selling.
They look like they could be on the tour.
What's on them?
They got all the gear. All the gear, no idea. It's I agree. Like, the town where I live, lots of people cycle. It's not the cycling friendliest city, but there's a lot of people who are really into cycling. So it's quite a green kind of area. People trying to use active transport. And some people are like full lycra, spent thousands on their bikes. And like I say, a lot of my friends spend an awful lot of time and money talking about and fiddling around with bikes. And just seems to be something that, I don't know, the design community that I know, it seems to resonate a fair bit with. And of all the sporting events that they tend to talk about and mention and maybe chat about on Twitter, the tour seems to get things going a bit more in my Twitter world when it comes to designers. So if anyone's got any thoughts on why that is, drop us a comment, because I'm fascinated about where the appeal is.
I think it's not just appeal, it's also like from the business side. It seems to be, if you ask a random like person like what cycling event they know, they more or less just know about Tour. Most haven't heard of like Giro d'Italia or Vuelta España, which are the two other biggest ones, but everyone knows the Tour. And that's interesting, like from the business perspective. It's like they seem to have this almost like a monopoly on what people perceive cycling to be, professional cycling to be.
Interesting. Looking forward to getting into that a bit more today. So, as always, we are going to start off shortly with Franz taking us through the business model and the strategy. A little different to usual when it comes to this one, but a bit of a story of the Tour de France. Little palate cleanser, little quiz just to take us away from that, and then we are into Alen with the numbers as always, and there were going to be some big ones today, and then we'll wrap up. We usually talk about the threats, opportunities for the products or the brands we're talking about. Might be a bit different today. Maybe just kind of talking about the how we feel about the future prospects of the Tour, and whether if it was a stock, would we be buying or selling. So before we get into it, it'd be good to kind of find out a bit more about either of you. Are you Tour watchers? Franz, you've already mentioned you're not really a cyclist. I have to confess, I've never watched Tour de France. I watch a lot of sport. Bit worried that this is going to make me add another one to my list of things that I watch. But Franz, not a watcher, you're not much of a cyclist. Alen, get the feeling you might be more into it than both of us.
Yeah, before I open up, maybe Franz, you want to go first?
I've never watched Tour de France. I only have one friend who doesn't cycle at all, but recently got into watching cycling. So I get all the stories of how this is interesting and the strategies and how it works. Still didn't get into it, honestly. But now even more enjoyed reading about it, researching about it from not purely the sports perspective, but from business perspective. So
might get a few more of the audience into it after today. So Alen, fair to say you're more into it than us. How long have you been a fan? Do you cycle?
How long? Probably around 20 years now.
Wow.
So I've started watching when I was 11, 12.
Right.
It was one of those things. So back then it was really unpopular, even in Slovenia. But it was the only thing that was on during the summer on TV. So I was just like, mom is at home, like mom is at work, dad is at work. I just need to watch something. So I started watching. In the beginning, it's boring because it's just people like pedaling to get first to the finish line. And then you start to see, actually it's more interesting. There is strategies, there is stories, there is heroes, there is like all these intertwined stories in there. And obviously at that time Lance Armstrong was big, so the US media did what US media does well, which is just create a story and create a lot of content around it. So I read the book written about not just his story. That was before it was revealed that he was using enhancing drugs, but nevertheless the book was still interesting from like understanding the sports and so on. So that's when it started for me, but not a big like road cyclist, but I did get into, let's call it trail cycling. So that's kind of my thing. So not being on the road, but more being in the forests with my bike. I was just doing one tour this weekend. It was really nice.
Lovely landscapes to cycle around in Slovenia as well. So
yep,
and
nice.
Don't know if you're going to mention later, recent countryman of yours won the Tour de France, right?
Twice.
Has that boosted things a lot?
Yeah, it did. I mean, now now everyone is into cycling, and they either really watch it intently or they just kind of one of those, as Franz, you said, success fans. And a question that really gets me mad is if I'm watching the Tour de France and somebody comes and asks who is first, and tells me everything about that fan, because if you're watching one single stage of the Tour de France, this is a wrong question to ask who is first, because it's not about that. Like, it's 21 stages, there's strategies within the stage and so on. So yeah, I did get that the sport is much more popular, and that comes with its pros and cons.
All the newbies
having annoying questions asked.
Oh, Dad.
How do you pronounce the chap's name that won it?
Tadej Pogačar.
Okay, I'm not going to try and do that.
Yeah, it's okay.
Cool. Brilliant. So, Alen, the Tour de France nerd gonna pass on some of that good knowledge to us today. But as always, we are going to kick off with Franz in his special shirt, taking us through with his top end research. He's already told us that's why he's got it, and take us through a bit of the background, the strategy, and the business model of Tour de France.
Sure. I'll actually leave the business model to Alen.
Mm-hmm.
He'll be talking about how the tour makes money, biggest cost factors, just how the business actually works. And I'm going to talk about, strategy and maybe also a little bit of history, because, the last teardowns that we talked about, the last teardowns that we had, featured companies founded in like 2008 or maybe 1998. So you had kind of maybe 10, 15, 20 years of history. So that was not really real history, right? You had a few main decisions that were easy to sum up. But now we have something that's like 120 years old, right? 1903 to 2023. That's 120 years. So there quite some stuff has happened. And I was also like Tom actually interested in how this whole thing actually started. And you already told the story, right? A newspaper with declining sales has an idea to organize a bike race because biking was up and coming at this point in time. So, hey, why not organize a bike race? And actually, we want this story to be longer. So let's switch things up a little. Bike races until then were always single day events. So the Tour de France was the first bike event, first bike race that was multi-day. I mean, and I wouldn't say that this is because the sport needed it, but also if you're a newspaper and you do the whole thing in order to write something about it, you don't want it to be one day, but in the best case, it's longer, right? So funny thing that this whole birth story wasn't necessarily coming from what's best for cycling and what would be the best cycling race, but more like what can we do in order to make this exciting and fun. And I gotta tell you, they really made it exciting and maybe not as much fun for riders, because the initial tour was wild, like really, really wild. I'm not saying that the tour now is a piece of cake, right? I'm just saying back then it was 6 stages, so 6 days, and these stages, they were monstrous, like 400 kilometers each.
And with old bikes.
With bikes like 18 kg steel bikes, right?
Yeah, and they're like 8 kilograms now, right? So it's a fair bit heavy.
It's crazy. There is one, like on YouTube, you can find, there is one of those really popular cycling channels where a person attempted to do one of those stages in this old bike. And it was brutal. Like just seeing that saddle, like leather saddle, how it breaks under you, and like you're driving,
and breaks you,
it breaks you, and 400 kilometers.
Yeah,
most of them had to walk part of it, didn't they? Especially when they put all the mountain stages in.
Exactly, because feature of these bikes was single speed.
Yeah,
one gear, like single speed, 18 kilograms. 400 kilometers on average, right? For 6 days straight. So you can think of this as a survival week. They made it in a way that it was like the hardest thing you could do.
Yeah. Apparently one of the, when they made it really super brutal, the leader was walking his bike up the mountains and saw the organizers, and he called them murderers. It was like,
really?
Yeah, that's when they decided to actually, because in the beginning they didn't go into Alps and into mountains, but then at a certain point they wanted to make it more interesting, and that's when they introduced the mountains, which are now the main event, where kind of the decision is taken who is the winner and who is not. And yeah, in the beginning this was like a wild idea to drive uphill in a race.
Crazy. And you know what? 60 starters, like 60 people competed in this race. That 60 people isn't a lot, right? You have 60 riders. That's Tour de France. So a tour for your country, and then you find 60 starters, and all of these rode as individuals, right? So today we have teams and so on, but these were like single dudes getting on a bike, riding for 6 days. And actually the first winner was a part-time chimney sweeper, Maurice Garin.
Oh,
It's happening.
Welcome to our world.
Sorry, everybody.
Maurice.
So basically, Maurice took 300 like French francs home, which is like 12,000 euros today, and his winning margin at the end of the 6 days was 3 hours. Like he was 3 hours in front of the next person after like 2,400 kilometers. Today is the day after stage 9. So we are recording this today. 9 stages have already been done at this year's Tour de France. 1,600 kilometers are done. Jonas Vingegaard leads in front of Slovenian mastermind Pogačar with a margin of 17 seconds. So 1,600 kilometers done, 17 seconds margin. Like when they started out, it was 3 hours margin for the full race, but obviously also this margin will be maybe 10 minutes max, right? So 10 minutes is already huge.
yeah, no. Usually like the first and the second place, that's like 2-3 minutes. That's kind of the usual. So yeah. And this is, if you look at the whole like amount of hours that's being ridden, 1 to 2 minutes, that's we're talking about 0.00, I don't know how many percentages. It's really, really small part of how long they're driving for.
Yeah. So yeah, it's quite different, right? It's completely different. We have now 21 stages, average kilometers. It's much less. So there is a bigger variety in stages. Some are long, some are sprint races. You have teams, 22 teams with 170, 80 riders, right? And yeah, so it's completely different. The race itself is completely different, but also riders were completely different, right? So these riders of day one, they were like, they weren't really athletes. They were like rock stars. I'm not saying that they weren't fit. Obviously, they were incredibly fit to be able to compete in that. But I was also like trying to understand what kind of people were these 60 dudes that went for this Tour de France. And basically what I read was that this Maurice, who won the first race, he lived off chocolate and stayed hydrated with alcohol. There are video clips in black and white showing riders of the front of the peloton jumping off their bikes, rushing into bars, stocking up their bags with champagne, wine, and cigarettes, and then jumping on their bikes again and continue riding. Like these people were like, they behaved like rock stars, badasses.
Bring it back. Bring back the champagne.
And apparently there was a belief among them, that was in the 1920s, that if you smoked before you went on a big climb, that would help.
Oh man, that was probably the tobacco company's advertising, right?
Not yet. But they were sharing cigarettes because like they wanted to help each other.
Right.
Crazy.
And I don't want to cover something you might be talking about, but obviously there was all the controversy over the last 20 years with performance-enhancing drugs, but they're very openly taking stimulants, shall we say, to get themselves through these races. Like, no bones about it. There was a lot
I mean, the thing was, as I said, that was a survival week. It wasn't necessarily a sporting event. It was like, somehow I need to survive these 6 days, and then you would do everything that you could to actually survive that. And actually, that wasn't the last story. Like in 1935, apparently, almost the entire peloton stopped to have a drink with locals.
Amazing.
And when I say drink, I'm not talking about water. So, so yeah, that was quite special. And these people, like these riders, they were local heroes. And obviously, since then, a lot has changed. So the tour is completely different. It's a huge event. And now I just want to look at some decisions that the tour operators took to bring this event from, let's say, a smart revenue booster or newspaper sales booster to like the biggest, most watched sports event in the world. So that's quite an interesting ride. And I hope that some of you will, or like Tom and Alan, you will just jump in and add to that, because it's going to be story time, pretty much story time.
Story
Do you
time
have
with
chapters
Franz.
again?
No, I don't have chapters this time. It's not as much from start to finish. It's more like what were the core decisions or what were the core features that they did in order to get so successful. And basically, let's start with product first. The first one was product design, because from the early days, there was a lot of experimentation. As you said, Alan, in the very beginning, they tried to make it even harder. So Henri Desgrange, I don't know
Wow,
if that's how you pronounce
really
it. I really
convincing.
tried.
That sounds about
So
right.
this was the founder of Lotto and also like Tour de France. He famously said, too many starters crossed the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
So that was in the early years. And then a year later, the trek of the tour led through the French Alps. And again, now it's like, sure, that's where cycling races go. But back then, with these bikes, it was not a thing. Like the road cycling was mostly a flat or hilly terrain sport. Sending you through Alps was crazy. So that was the first step, right? Making it even harder. But it wasn't all about the difficulty, because early on they thought also about what fans would enjoy. And it turned out that it's much more interesting for viewers to have shorter stages. So initially 400 kilometers, they actually decreased the stage length and stretched the time frame. So they could, again, still cover it for a longer period of time. What they could also do is still manage to visit most of the parts of France and really have this close collaboration with local communities. So that was a big first step to not make it 6 days, but prolong the whole thing. So it's more enjoyable to watch. You don't have to stand there for like ages to see these riders. It's actually a shorter stage, but it takes much longer and it's a bigger event, and it can still go through most parts of France. So every year the tour has a different track, right? It's not that the Tour de France has one track or they have a track for the next 5 years. No, every single year they check out sceneries, roads. Cities can apply for being a pass-through or a stop on the Tour de France. And yeah, that obviously boosts popularity hugely, right? You as a city can get the Tour de France to your doorstep. You can be a stop there.
Even if you're not in France, which is an interesting thing. Now they started like going
Exactly.
abroad. Yeah.
That's so crazy, because in the very beginning, that was only France, right? So it's Tour de France. You get popular there. You get into every town, every village, or let's say at least every county. But then they realize, well, we are quite there. We are the French race, but we also see that we are very popular beyond French borders. So what they decide to do is internationalize. So neighboring countries. So Spanish, Italian, Swiss mountains. They even decide to have the start and the finish outside of France. So there were starts or finishes in Belgium. I think the Netherlands, right? Germany.
Denmark for sure. Yeah, Netherlands as well.
I think, is that true? Do you remember that? Even UK?
Yeah, we had it. Is it the Grand Depart or something?
Grand Depart.
Yeah, so we had it in London, I think 2007, Leeds 2014, and it was massive. It was such a big deal, and it made those areas look spectacular. I remember it coming down through the countryside through Yorkshire, and it was stunning. And that, going to touch on this, right? That's a big reason to showcase, have the stage on the tour.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it was so popular to be a stop or a cross through on the tour that there is application, and there are stats for 2013. So this was 110-year anniversary. 250 cities applied. Yeah, we had this discussion already. I don't know. What did you want to say?
No, you said 110th year anniversary. It's true, yeah. 2013 was 110 years, but it was 100th Tour de France.
Because of the gaps with
Yeah,
the wall.
exactly.
Yeah.
So 110 years Tour de France, 2013, 250 cities applied to be a stop on the tour, even Qatar and Tokyo.
Wow.
So I don't know how they imagined this to be, but that just shows the international appeal of this whole thing, right? So you want to be part of that. Even it's the Tour de France, but I mean, you can be London and get a start of the Tour de France, or you can be Utrecht and you can be the start of the Tour de France. Or this year, you can be Bilbao and be the start of the Tour de France. So this year, we have the track from Bilbao, Spain, to Paris in the end. So
Yeah, the end is always Paris. That's a given.
really?
Yeah.
It has since the 60s, isn't it? It's been Paris, I think. I think there was a time when it wasn't.
Maybe, yeah, but now lately, like
Now
you
always.
can bid to be the starting city, but at the end it's always Paris.
Yeah. Racing
Yeah.
down L'Arc de Triomphe, right? And
Yeah.
Champs-Elysees. Looks stunning.
Champs-Élysées.
Yeah. Just looks
That's
beautiful.
a commercial for France, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing is a big commercial for France and for neighboring countries.
You are giving me such a great segue, because apart from product, there is one other thing that the Tour de France nailed from early on, which is basically natural, designing for media coverage. And I mean, you can turn this around. I mean, this whole thing was founded by a newspaper, so obviously it was designed for media coverage, but that's what they did early on really, really well. So talking to people, telling stories, and eventually also making money from it. But let's start first things first. We already made this joke about my weirdly crisscrossed t-shirt. That was one of the first very smart moves when I'm talking about designing for media coverage. So in 1919, they introduced these iconic shirts. So yellow shirt for the overall leader of the table, measured by time. Then the green shirt, leader of the sprint section, measured by points. Then red polka dot jersey, leader of the mountain classification. So again, measured by points. And the white jersey, I think, overall leader measured by time below 25. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
the
Alan?
unwriters,
Correct,
right?
yes.
So, yeah, shirts, right? But again, super smart move to bring something that's maybe hard to understand, like who leads this whole thing if you have a stage every day. Super easy to understand because somebody wears a very bright shirt and you can see this from distance. It's possible to see in the newspaper, even though if it's not a colored newspaper yet, you can still realize whether this is now a completely different colored shirt. So you can see the leader. And that is actually such a big move that it was introduced by the Tour de France, but adopted by almost all other races, maybe in different colors. So some tours
Yes.
have different colors, but this color scheme of somebody that leads the table has one color and somebody who leads another discipline has another color. Everybody, every single bike race adopted this.
Yeah, if it's a more day bike race. If it's a single day, then everybody starts with the same, like their team jersey. But do you also going to talk about the story behind it, why it's yellow?
I don't know. Tell me more.
So, the reason this main jersey is yellow is because that newspaper was printed on yellow pages. So it was literally yellow newspaper. So they just made the jersey yellow, and that was kind of the story there.
So you could not print the color of the t-shirt and it would appear yellow because it's a black and white newspaper, obviously.
A brand tie-in, right? It's like, this is the color of our pages, this is the color of the leader, but very clever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice one.
And the same story in Italy. They have a pink jersey, and their main newspaper there, La Gazette, something like that. It's also like printed still on pink paper.
And that yellow is iconic, right? Like it's a real well-known sports symbol, but also they use it in a lot of the branding now. I'm sure that maybe wasn't the initial thought on how it becomes so widespread, but if you look on the website and the logo and everything, it pops, just like designers like.
And now, as we're rambling, a quick detour to this ranking system, right? You heard me saying yellow shirt, overall leader of the table measured by time. Then you have this white shirt, overall leader, age 25 younger, measured by time. But then you have green shirts, sprint sections measured by points. And then you have red polka dots, leader of mountains, measured by points. So this whole thing is fascinating because it's like if you have mountain stages, they are classified differently, right? Some mountain stages are harder than the other one. If you win a harder one, you get more points than if you win an easier one. And the fascinating thing here is that it creates a level of complexity that's not too hard to understand, right? It was kind of okay-ish to explain this real quick, but at the same time, it's complex enough that you can really, really nerd about this. And you can really, really go into strategy and in which mountain stages to invest and in which ones not to invest. And yes, they win this, but it's not going to help them as much because they haven't won the harder mountain stage and so on. So I find this slightly weird ranking system one of the smart decisions to make to make the sport even interesting in the first place.
And it's also a way to give teams that know that they don't have like so-called general classification contender, so like those that go after the yellow jersey, it gives other teams something to write for, and it gives them also a way to be visible on TV, and it gives them something else also to do instead of just being felt like, oh, we're just the passengers here, because usually it's pretty clear who the main favorites are.
Was this a quick question? Was this we've talked about why that's got great business value and it highlights the other teams, their sponsors get some visibility, all that kind of stuff. Was this a conscious decision, or was it just other than the yellow jersey, which obviously tied into the newspaper, do we think that was a conscious thing of having all these different shirts so that people would feel like they got some attention and stuff, or has that just become a side effect of it getting so much coverage?
I don't know.
No. I'd say they're smart and do this for a reason.
Yeah.
Let's pretend this is the reason, yeah. But it does make sense. It does make sense to have more to write about. The newspaper, it gives you more storylines. Even if one of these classifications is decided already after second stage back then, now you have some other classification to write about.
That's very
smart. And it gives different type of riders chance to also come and have something to win.
Yeah. And again, that's exactly the designing for media coverage, right? Having stories, having legends in different categories. That all makes sense and fits to this whole fits to this whole strategy of designing for media coverage, which is the current topic, and also continuing pretty strong after this decision with the shirts and basically solely focusing on newspaper, because 1931 Tour de France was one of the first things to be radio broadcasted, and not only radio broadcasted but also selling rights to radio broadcast this. 1948 first television broadcasting contract, again one of the first ones to actually sell this, but the big huge step where they really professionalized this was in the 1960s. So in the 1960s they really started to have formal sponsorship agreements with brands, like featuring their logos on race infrastructure, including it in jerseys, support vehicles, or having it like generally present. And Tour de France was one of these sporting events that pioneered the whole way of marketing sports events like we know it today. again, we were talking about how riding a bike over a mountain is nothing new today, but it was pretty new back then. Similar thing was true for professional sponsorships agreements. You would always have companies who wanted to provide bikes or wanted to provide a car just to be there, but these huge sponsorship deals, having partnerships and having like gold members and platinum members and so on, or main partners and support partners and so on, that was pretty much pioneered by Tour de France in the 1960s. And there is this awesome story about the first official car supplier deal. So initially, French car company Peugeot, they provided all the cars for free. So they're like, yeah, sure, newspaper, cool event, great, we get coverage. So we give you the cars for free. You don't need to buy them. So super generous, right? So then when actually the Tour de France rolled out these formal sponsorship agreements, there was also an agreement for this whole support fleet. And Peugeot actually refused an offer of 500,000 francs. So this is like $85,000. So
they were asked to pay half a
exactly.
million and they said no.
They're like, yeah, we still take your cars, but you need to pay 500,000 francs for this.
And they're like outraged. Nope. No way.
Exactly.
We're not paying for you to ride our cars. That's not the business we're in.
So yeah, Fiat takes the deal. Italian car company at this point in time, right? 6 million francs, so $1 million. So that was huge at this point in time. Like you have these huge sponsorship deals, and they were also bold about this, right? You are the Tour de France and you're kicking out your national car supplier to go with a car supplier, a direct rival from a neighboring country for a pretty sweet deal. Yeah, that's how business is done in the new sports world. And this is how Tour de France actually pioneered this, really making a business out of this. So quite wild. And now to do a little bit of marketing here, what's the sponsor now?
For cars?
For the cars.
Yeah. Skoda?
Yeah, 20 years, I think, right? 20-year partnerships, I think. So it should have been the sponsor already when you started watching Tour de France, Alen.
Yeah, I still can remember those like Fiat signs, because every time on the finish line, there's always like the logo of the company. So for some reason, I can remember Fiat.
Yeah.
So maybe that was the time when it was like switched.
Alan's an OG. He's been watching decades. Yeah.
Yeah. So don't call me success fan, Franz. This is...
Do we know what Skoda pay? I mean, it must be astronomical compared to...
We do.
Oh.
I mean, it's a yearly fee, and they have like 3 levels of sponsorships. And like the top tier, it costs 5 million euros per year.
Okay.
And this is what Skoda is paying among some other companies.
Sweet. Curious about to hear more numbers, but there is another thing that's crucial to maybe, I mean, obviously not the most important thing, but a very important decision or a very important activities that they ran beyond product design itself, designing for media coverage. It is how the Tour de France not only attracted fans, but actually has ever worked together with fans. So we already talked about these 3+ billion user, 3+ billion television viewers, right? Every year, there are 10 to 12 million spectators on site along the road. 10 to 12 million people traveling or being from France and watching the tour live. And these people along the road were not just bystanders, right? They have always gone all in. So now I'm not talking about the things that you see right now in television. We're going to talk about this. But again, let's jump back to the early days, because this was a national phenomenon, right? Riders were local heroes. So you go to the tour to cheer for the rider coming from your hometown. And this leads you to do some stupid stuff. So in 1904, several hundred fans tried to help Antoine Fauré by throwing nails and glass on the road, so they would have an advantage against their rivals. So one rider even got punched unconscious so that Antoine could win the stage.
Wild times on the tour.
And later, the more socially acceptable way was that you would push riders uphill. You know, like people would just help you get uphill by just pushing you. Obviously, there's like referees all around, like they're driving their red Skodas around the road, and they start whistling if they see this. But it's still part of the spectacle.
Does it still happen now? Does it?
Where it's accepted is if you fall down, if you have a puncture or whatever, then it's totally acceptable that you get on your bike and somebody pushes you for 20 meters, because it's also a type of bike where you need some help to get going.
Momentum.
But it's not acceptable if you're in the act of really driving.
You probably get killed as well because they go pretty fast.
I mean, for me, this is so interesting and actually at the same time so weird. Like, just imagine, this is the biggest sport event in the world. Let's say with the Olympics, the most important event in cycling.
For sure.
And then you have a bystander high-fiving with a pro athlete or pushing a pro athlete. Like, just imagine there is a football game and somebody goes there and gives one of the players a bottle of water. Like, they would be kicked down and carried off the pitch. But here it's like daily business. Tour de France is like fans are so close to the riders, they interact, they get media coverage. So that's what I'm trying to lead up to, right? So this was not. I mean, that was obviously a little bit too enthusiastic, if you want to call it like this, to basically put glass and nails on the road to stop rivals. But this whole thing of how fans engaged with the tour and engaged with riders was something that was there from the start and actually supported by the tour itself. And again, for me, that was so weird. First thing is weird that they're so closely related. Second thing that's weird is, I mean, that's not a 90-minute event. Like, how interesting can it be to watch a bike race that is a stage with 100 kilometers and you are at one point of this stage and then riders pass by and that's it, right? So luckily, not like me, they realized that this is not a sports event. This is a full-blown festival, 3 weeks festival, huge. So they're not selling tickets to an event. They're selling tickets, or they're selling an experience of a 3-week festival. And as
there's
I already
no tickets.
said, I mean,
free.
there is no.
Yeah.
It's free, but in the sense that's all. That's a huge festival.
Yeah.
So the route changes every year. And obviously, it leads through the most beautiful parts of France and neighboring countries. This means that people, they arrive early, they maybe bring their bikes, they experience the tracks, just go on the same roads that the pro cyclists would go in a few days. They either stay in one place and do their holidays there and then have the highlight of the Tour de France passing by, or they have caravans and just go follow the tour and basically travel with the tour for 3 weeks. And the thing is that this thing, or this engagement of fans is so boosted by the tour itself. So when you watch the tour, when you watch footage of the tour, have you realized that a big part of the broadcasting time is not riders, but it's what happens around the track? So
there's always a beautiful helicopter view of a city, and then there's the name of the city, and then they show the castle. There's always a castle, and they show the castle, and then the broadcasters explain something about the city and how beautiful it is, and then back to action, and then back to nature, back to action.
And what comes in between?
And commercials in between. Commercials, very long commercials.
And also, dressed up fans
yeah.
doing weird stuff. So fans actually do everything to get filmed because it works. That's media strategy in itself. So obviously you have this nice track, you film the castles, you film the track, you film the scenic surroundings, but you also film all the weird things that people do along the track. And they do really, really weird things. Like they dress in costumes. They build up mobile homes that look like castles along the road. They have these awesome choreographies organized by fans. Like, have you seen some of these performances?
Yeah.
So
amazing.
Human statues in fields, hundreds of people lining up, moving. So when filmed from a helicopter or from a drone, it would look like a moving bike, for example.
Oh, wow.
Or like, I've recently seen a digger, like a literal excavator.
That was this year, yeah.
One dude hangs from the arm of the excavator
on a bike,
and he's moved in a circle, riding over like mountains of hay balls. Like people do crazy shit, and they know they want to do it because all these facilities and spaces are actually even provided. So local communities say, here's a field, do whatever you want with it. This is how you can get on TV. Secondly, they will know it's going to work. If you do something creative, you will be on TV, and not like a naked dude running over a soccer pitch, but like really you get your 2 minutes of fame because this helicopter will fly over you for 2 minutes.
For sure.
And
yeah.
Everybody will see it. The whole world, 3.5 billion people will see this. And this is why, I mean, this decision is so smart to try to get fans engaged, really give them a stage, and then create this self-propelling movement of people getting even more creative because they want to be broadcasted. I think that's one of the smartest moves that they have made.
That reminds me of a funny story. I believe it was 2 years ago at Vuelta. So this is the Spanish 3-week race, where in one of those helicopter scenes, the helicopter actually captured on the top of an apartment building. They captured like a marijuana plant, not just like a plant, like how do you call like a whole
plantation?
Yeah. And then police went into action. So not sure if that was part of the strategy, but things like that happen.
Maybe they were
as well.
hoping to make, do a lot of business during that period. A lot of people in town.
Trying to get some free commercial there. It backfired big time for them.
Cool.
So basically it's moving around and people are moving, an awful lot of money being spent in these towns by these people, but they're also becoming real evangelists for the brand and the product and the tour, right?
And I was trying to do a quick back of the napkin calculation of like, how much would I, if I'm a mayor, be willing to spend on acquiring people into my city, if having people go through my city? Because mind you, most of these cities, they're not like destinations. They are just a point between two cities that happen to be the beginning and the end of the stage. So those numbers that we heard from France, 10, 15 million, this is a cumulative of all the like fans that visit Tour de France in a year. So let's say I'm a city in France nobody has heard of, but it happens that this year Tour de France goes through my city. How much am I benefiting? France already loves this exercise.
I love it.
So let's just say that only 5,000 people stay in this town just because they decide, hey, we don't want to be at the end point or the beginning of this Tour de France. We want to be in the middle. There's going to be fewer fans. There's going to be more like the
space
real experience
to do a
of
performance.
France. Exactly. Yeah, maybe even this. So let's say 5,000 people decide to come to our city and stay in our city in hotels, eat food and so on. And each of them spends 200 euros. That's 1 million euros from 5,000 people staying there. So it shows you like it has a real economic impact. Even if you're just a city that this festival goes through.
Yeah.
No, there has to be even much higher, this number for those cities. Their teams stay, fans stay, where like, there's an end destination of each of the stage.
Yeah.
And they're advertising their city, right, for people who aren't at the festival as well. And
Yeah.
are you going to touch on the business model of how those cities, towns get to host? Cool.
I will.
Yeah, because it's a bargain, I think.
Yeah, it still seems to be a bargain. I mean, I can tell you right now. So, for example, apparently it costs around somewhere between 50 and 100K to be stage start, and then twice as much to be stage finish of a Tour de France stage.
So you might go through... Sorry, go on.
Like, Tour de France viewers, please don't punish me for that, but stage finish is not the same thing as stage start.
Not necessarily. There's a transfer a lot of times in
Okay.
between, and you have to travel between.
Such a
cities.
newbie question, right?
I mean, mind you, like a lot of these stages, they finish mountaintop, and they have a lot of troubles. So that's an interesting side story. Like up until recently, they only were able to host mountaintop finishes, which are the best type of finishes for most fans, on like big mountains that had enough space to host like a stage and have enough space for fans to come there and so on. But now they're also experimenting with, hey, on top we just have the finish line, and then all the riders and obviously then journalists and so on, they meet like 20 minutes below in a valley, and that's where this whole I don't know, they're all based, let's say, the caravan.
And again, super smart decision, right? So I think if they had the same realization that you don't have to have finish of a stage and start at the next stage on the same point in the same location, but imagine you could sell the finish to one city and then the start to the next city that's like 20 kilometers apart. Smart.
Yeah, and sometimes even more. But yeah, and by the way, the great departure, Tom, can you say it again?
I think it's Le Grand Départ. Is that right?
Yes.
Sorry,
that sounds
French
great to
listeners.
me. Sorry to all the French listeners. That costs much more. It's a 3-day event, because then the teams start there. There is the first announcement of all the riders and teams, and that costs several million euros to be the great departure city.
Hey, and also talking about engagement of fans, geek question, Alan. Have you played the Tour de France fantasy game?
No, but I did play back then. There was a cycling manager game. So you were manager of your own team, and you decided which rider is going to attack and so on. And I did play that, but not the fantasy.
That's
Is it a
actually
big
quite
business?
popular.
Yeah, right.
So Tour de France has their own fantasy game. So you put together a team, you manage your budget, everything is cross-checked with actual tour results. You get prize money. They got everything in this game. Like, this is a full-blown fantasy game on top of the Tour de France. Mixed reality, right? You manage your team, but everything is based on actual results. So it's a mix of, I would say, it's a low-scale gambling game, but pretty successful, actually.
Yeah, I didn't realize they had because it's with most sports now have something like that, don't they? I follow the football, quite into the golf, and they both have really well designed fantasy games. Yeah, I didn't know that Tour de France had the same. Cool.
Okay, last thing that we cannot not talk about when talking about the Tour de France is doping scandal, right?
Yeah, we went there.
Yeah, so we want to have some names. Call out some names, Alan. Who got stripped the title?
Lance Armstrong. I forgot all the other names. There was another US rider or a couple who were with him in the team. But if you have the list, just go ahead, Franz.
I don't. That's why I wanted to ask you. I just remember Jan Ullrich.
Oh, yeah. He had
German.
a scandal as well.
So that was huge.
There was a few, yeah.
And that was not 1 year. That was like from the 1990s
10,
to 2000, 10, 15 years of ever new scandals, right? It was like 1 year, big scandal, then they shut it down. It was like year after year, you had either titles revoked or a really renowned driver disqualified for doping. And that was a huge punch to the credibility of the tour. It almost became to a point where people said, well, I don't really care about this because that's not performance in any case. And it was actually kicked off, this doubt was kicked off by these crazy performances of some of the athletes. Like people just started to wonder, like, how is this possible? How can people do such a performance? Turns out they can't without enhancement drugs. And
funny thing though is, like, today, if you watch Tour de France this year, last year, there's like record-breaking times, like ascents, how fast they ascend up a hill. So
really,
yeah, it's much faster than in those times. Like just yesterday, they bit on a. Oh, I'm not gonna go into exact numbers, but it was just like a sizable difference from before, and people are still asking themselves, like, is it still happening? But in the last 5-ish so years, there weren't any scandals anymore.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, sadly,
hard to
that's
know.
an industry in itself, right? If you can develop performance-enhancing substances that go untraced, and they're extremely valuable. But that's
I
a
think
whole
this
different business model.
Yeah.
have
and
you
the
watched
battle is
Icarus?
definitely still ongoing, right? So it took them a while to actually catch this and to stop it. They really invested a lot into targeted drug testing, improved laboratories, collaboration with anti-doping agencies. So they really tried to, fix the damage that was done to the sport and to the credibility of the sport. And as you said, Alan, they seem to have gotten good at this. But again, when we talk about the threats of the whole industry of this business, that's definitely one of the biggest ones. Like if you get another one of these, that could damage reputation immensely.
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubting, though, performance enhancing drugs aside, that these are the fittest of the fit. Like the level, the VO2 max that they are capable of getting to just doesn't compare with a lot of other athletes. They are superhuman even without that enhancement. It's quite something. I don't think many of us would be able to do 30 seconds going up one of those mountains, let alone. How long are these stages, Alan, in the mountains?
4 or 5 hours.
It's absolutely insane.
And this is just like they go for 4 hours, and then the final hour is the brutal,
really, right?
12% uphill like climb. It's just
Tired
crazy.
just thinking about it.
Yeah, it's crazy. And there's even like an amateur Tour de France happening. I think it's before the real Tour de France. So if you're an amateur who wants to try all the exact hills and climbs that the professionals will take, you can go on the amateur race and just try it for yourself. That's it's more of a just. It's not so much of a race than like just a
An experience, like test yourself against it. The marathon runner, is it Chipkobe? Oh, I'm going to pronounce that really wrong.
Which one?
Have a go at it.
Kipchoge.
Kipchoge. Sorry, got my pronunciation wrong again.
I don't know if I'm correct, but at least we now all know.
Yeah, we know how not to pronounce it.
In this room, at least.
He runs at like nearly 2 hours, right, for a marathon, like close to. And I remember seeing this video. They set a treadmill at like a running event at his pace. And even like really good club runners couldn't do more than like 30 seconds.
So
it's nuts.
My high school teacher bet the class that we couldn't run 3 laps on our school track in the time the marathon world record runner would run the full marathon. And cocky teenagers obviously said, no way. we can do it. We can do it. And then we actually did the test and we failed miserably. Like really, 3 laps around a soccer football pitch. No chance.
Yeah.
That's
Nuts.
a big circle though, right?
Yeah.
How big is one circle around the soccer pitch?
300 meters, something.
Yeah,
so it would be like a little bit less than a
kilometer. And a
kilometer.
half.
And they're doing this for
But
like
it's a
50k.
very smart way for a teacher to motivate kids to run for a kilometer and a half. That's not easy to do.
Yeah, for sure. Franz, that was brilliant. Really interesting story. And yeah, some really wily moves that they made that have just persisted and just been built on over the years. It's very clever work from Leotto to make it into that juggernaut that it is now.
L'Equipe, by the way, now.
What's that, sorry?
Yeah.
L'Equipe.
Ah,
So Lotto
the
was
newspaper,
was it shut down after World War II, right?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, something
think so.
happened.
I didn't research on the reason, but now it's L'Equipe, or the newspaper connected with that, and obviously the Tour de France has a separate entity now.
Yeah. So actually it was sold to another company. Well, I'll talk about it in a bit.
Yeah, we'll get
I
on
just
to
wanted
that.
to chat very quickly about, why is Tour de France the only event that most people have heard about? Why is
Cycling
there
event
no-
or general
Yeah,
event?
cycling event. Yeah, because like if we talk about tennis, there is like you have Wimbledon, New York, Paris,
Roland Garros, and so on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And here it's basically just Tour de France. Yes, there is a few other races. There's also so-called classics, the one-day races that really matter. But everyone more or less just knows about Tour de France. And there is some reasons to go into that. One, it's just so funny, but one of the most important ones is just the fact that if you want to do a really tough mountain stages, there's basically 1 or 2 months in the year when you can really go over Alps without having bad weather. And this is July, August, maybe September. And that's why most of this, like for example, Giro usually happens in May, June, and then Tour de France has the best dates, which is July and August. And then those teams that prepare for Tour de France, it's hard for those riders to also do, maybe Vuelta, which comes after that, which is September. And then in September, in Vuelta, there's snow sometimes happening in the ride. So the calendar itself seems to be one of the reasons why Tour de France also has such a advantage over others. But at the same time, it also limits them because it has a lot of viewers, this sport, but it only happens like for 3 weeks in a year, whereas some other sports like soccer, basketball, you can like do them throughout the whole year and so on. So that's the disadvantage they have against other sports. But within the cycling, it is a huge moat that Tour de France has over others, the calendar itself.
Also, that's how you started watching it, right? So summer, there is nothing to broadcast in any case, right? So
that's another thing.
Yeah.
First thing, television broadcasters, they're super happy to have some content to fill their afternoons with. Again, it's afternoons, it's not evenings. So again, time is free and people have time to watch it because summer holidays, schools are closed and so on. So I think this whole timing of July is a big contributor to people being able to travel there, it being picked up by broadcasters so well, it having so high numbers of viewers. So definitely timing was a great one here.
Yeah, massive. I wonder if it would be as popular if it clashed with the football season and people's holidays not being so available. Probably not, to your point, right? That's why you're saying it. It's
the only thing, and I tried to find this out, was what happens when there are Olympics. So I tried to Google and ChatGPT if people preferred tour over Olympics. And actually that's the only thing that some riders would sacrifice, right? You would still rather go to the Olympics, Summer Olympics, if it clashed, because it does not always clash, but some riders or some of the big riders, they do go rather to Olympics than Tour de France, just for the fact that it happens only every 4th year. But again, they try not to clash, but sometimes it does happen.
Yeah, but also it's a completely different race. Like you could go to Tour de France and still go to Olympics. Usually it doesn't clash, at least lately. And like Tour de France is a 3-week race. And in Olympics, there's just one stage where the winner is decided. There's a Trump trial winner, and then there's like a road stage winner. So I remember, was that 2 years ago or 3 years ago when the Olympics were in Tokyo? I know that basically everyone who was on Tour de France also went to Tokyo to do their
quick
stage
1 day race of 6 hours. Yeah. Let me just go to Tokyo and win this and then go back to Tour de
But
France.
it didn't work. You know, like you're so tired, you basically have to sacrifice one for the other.
Right.
But still, like for me, the question is like, why is there no winter Tour de France in Australia or Patagonia or something? You know, like a completely different location. But there's so much culture involved. Like it's not a closed spectacle. Like you need the nation to embrace this sport and to make it happen.
Again, analogy, right? We talked about Michelin and this Michelin guide. So another French example, Paris-Dakar. You know this motor race, Paris-Dakar?
Yeah.
You also know that it, for ages, it hasn't started in Paris and went to Dakar, but it's still the name.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, why didn't they do this?
Exactly.
Tour de France, but in
again,
Australia.
French example, like great thing, Paris-Dakar. Doesn't happen from Paris to Dakar, hasn't happened there in ages. But yeah, would be a great thing to...
There's an opportunity out
adjust
there.
this also for...
Opportunity, exactly.
Yeah. Alan's going to start the Tour to Slovenia round.
There is Tour de Slovenia.
Oh, sorry.
Basically, every country has its own tour.
Österreich Radrundfahrt. Can you say this?
I have no idea what that was.
There was a race across Austria.
Cool. Let's
Palate
have
cleanser.
a quick quiz before we get into some juicy numbers with Alan. So, unlike last time, Franz, only one of my things has been covered with your bit so far. But
Good
I'm
ratio.
still going to drop it in there just in case anyone missed it. So, before we get into that, though, did have a quick look at the stats on the nations that have won the Tour de France. So, Slovenia, 2 wins. Very recent, as to be said. Great Britain, 6. Austria, how many wins?
0.
Franz, come on. I was surprised. I really thought, given the geography and everything, that there would have been an Austrian winner by now.
Nah, there is only one discipline where one Austrian dominates. Race across America.
Really?
Yeah, always won by Michael Strasser, the crazy dude. But completely different story. Completely different kind of race.
It's one to look up, though, definitely. Okay, so quick few questions. So, first question. Which rider is given the name Lanterne Rouge in the Tour de France? Is it A, the cyclist who finishes last in the entire race? B, the cyclist with the most aggressive performance? C, the cyclist who leads the most stages? Or D, the youngest cyclist in the race?
Lanterne Rouge. Is it red light?
Yep.
So last rider?
I think it's B, the one that's most aggressive. And it's given after every stage, but I'm not sure. I'm guessing.
Franz is correct. A.
Oh, the last one.
Yes, the Lanterne
that
Rouge.
because also this is a traditional, or it literally translates into German, rote Laterne, like red lantern, which is what you get when you're the last one.
Indeed. And apparently it comes from the red light that was hung at the back of a train, so you could indicate that there were no like carriages lost or anything. So a bit like the wooden spoon, but yeah.
But what happens today is like every stage there's one rider picked up as like the most aggressive of the day,
Right.
and they get for next stage they wear a red number on their back.
Okay.
So it's kind of a way to give you
So is
even
this
if
good
you
or
don't win.
bad? Like,
That's
are
a
you
good.
aggressive?
So this is now not the
Lanterne
red.
Rouge.
Yeah, this
This is
But
the something else
apparently
rouge.
something else.
So do they
Yeah.
measure that in power output? Is that
No.
no? How do they measure that?
This is just someone who has, it's called an attack. It means you try to distance yourself from the pack.
It's
Right.
like
Somebody
play of the
who-
game in football.
Yeah,
Okay.
player of
So
the
is
game.
it just
Play
like
of the match.
their vibe is very aggressive and like they're making moves?
They make it interesting.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've heard of the yellow jersey given to the rider leading the tour, but what is the polka dot jersey awarded for? Is it A, best young rider, B, best sprinter, C, king of the mountains, or D, the overall leader?
See,
It's the king of the mountains.
King of the mountains, indeed. I think we did
Mountain goat.
briefly touch on that. Is that one of the more prestigious things, is it, Alan? Is that a biggie?
No, I think the most prestigious obviously is
Obviously
yellow.
yellow.
I would say the second one is then the green one.
Right.
Really? Sprint
yeah.
is more prestigious than mountain goat.
Yeah, because the mountain goat is usually not won by the best climbers. It's usually won by those who attack on like every single. So what happens is like every stage it consists of different hills or climbs or mountains, right? So what many cases happens is the best climbers, they preserve their energy and they stay in a peloton until the last climb, and they only then explode and go and try to win the stage. So these polka dot jerseys are sometimes, and it looks like this is going to be also one of those years, are won by basically climbers that decide, hey, I'm going to try to collect as many points on these hills that precede the main mountain, you know?
Right.
So I could climb those first 3 hills, collect 20 points on each of those, and then I don't know, the last hill is still worth 40 points, but you know, the best climber only climbs there because they're more focused on the yellow jersey. So that's why the polka dot jersey is not seen as like, oh, I'm really the best climber. It's usually like somebody
Tactics.
else. Yes, tactics.
Interesting. Cool. So that's the king of the mountains, the polka dot jersey. Question 3. You might not need the multiple choice here. Actually, I'm just going to ask for an answer. Which country has the most Tour de France winners? Hazard a guess?
France.
US.
It is France. 21, I think. That's a lot of winners. United States, France, Belgium, Spain were the options, but yeah, France right up there. The last French winner was Bernard Hinault, 1985. It's been a while, France. Like,
I mean, this was a national event for a long time, so that's a little bit skewed numbers
yeah,
here.
definitely a little skewed.
Yeah, of course.
But
Of course.
been a while. You look at Wikipedia and yeah, the first 20 years, it's like, yeah, we're nailing it. Final question. This is closest wins on this one. How many calories will the average tour rider burn off during the duration of the 21 stages? How many calories? I'll give you a moment to do a little bit of prototyping with numbers in your head.
I have my answer.
Yeah,
Franz, what's your answer?
210,000.
Okay, Alan?
Mine is 120,000.
Alan, the answer is 120,000. Very impressive. Incredibly quick Googling by you there, Alan. That's really quite something.
No, I just have this random fact that they need to eat 6,000 calories a day, like the riders. So I just multiplied this with like usually 20 stages, something like that.
Alan, this is why you're our numbers man. And that is
Exactly.
a wonderful segue into the financials of the Tour de France. So let's take a bit of a dive into the money, how it's made, and what those figures are looking like.
Exactly. So first, a little bit on the business model. So as Franz, and I think you, Tom, also touched upon, initially Tour de France was not the main product. The main product was newspaper. And Tour de France was just there basically to help sell the newspaper. And this whole chapter, we can call it, of this business was from when it was conceived, so from 1903, right, to mid-1960s. So in this stage, in this period of this 60 years, it was mostly like, yes, Tour de France has evolved. There was sponsorships, there was city fees and so on, but still the main reason it existed was to sell newspaper. So right around the time when the professional cycling was getting professionalized, also Tour de France was getting professionalized. So in 1965, Tour de France was basically bought by a private company called Amari Sport Organization. And that was basically, and they're still the sole owner of the Tour de France. And because they're a private company, this means that numbers are not freely available. So they don't disclose their revenue as opposed to, I don't know, NBA or Wimbledon or Champions League, where all of these numbers are easily found. But we did some digging and we found some numbers. But first, how does Tour de France make money? Essentially, there are three big buckets. So one bucket, the biggest one, is TV rights. That's 55%. Then the second bucket is sponsorships. That's 40%. And then the city fees are only 5%. So in my mind, I think the city fees were much higher in the beginning, but now they just keep creeping down because the whole thing is becoming basically a one big commercial, which is the case for most of the sport events. They are just commercials. I mean, the product is the sport, but the way it's monetized is companies basically trying to get attention of the viewers, and it's the same case in the Tour de France. So 55% of TV rights and 40% of sponsorships is basically the same thing. So that's like 95% of the money is made by just visibility, being seen by people. So let's break this down even further. So sponsorships is 40%, and this 40% comes from basically two biggest buckets. One is, we already talked about sponsors. So we have three levels of sponsors. There's main sponsors, such as Skoda, and then there's a bank called LCL. And for example, if you ever see a yellow jersey holder, so the rider in a yellow jersey, they always have the big LCL in their jersey. This is the name of the bank, basically. And so LCL has been like main yellow jersey sponsor for many, many years. And this puts them into this bucket of main sponsors. And these ones need to pay 5 million euros a year. As a side note, LCL actually has to pay even a little bit more because of the yellow jersey story. But yeah, the main sponsors pay 5 million euros per year. Then we have so-called official partners. For example, one of them is Tissot. This is a watch manufacturer, and they are the official timekeeper of Tour de France. So you can see them every time when there is any classification of the times and so on, which is a really nice product placement. And I think Wimbledon or somebody has something similar also for time. Rolex, of course. For Wimbledon, that's the only one that makes sense. And then the third tier of the sponsors is something they call official suppliers. So this is the caterers, hotels, airlines, car rentals, I think even the tires for bikes and so on. And these only cost 1 million per year. And I'm saying this only because I think it's not that much actually for being an official sponsor of Tour de France. So when you put all of these together, it's not exactly clear how much this is, but I'll come to this later, okay? So this is one bucket, it's the sponsorships in terms of like these three levels. And then the second level, they are monetizing the sponsorships. And this is less visible on TV, but it's more visible if you actually visit the Tour de France. It's something called publicity caravans. Do you know what that is?
Is it they have like a parade at the start, right? With loads of floats.
Exactly.
That was
like
mega popular back in the
carnival.
60s.
Yeah.
It's like a carnival.
Exactly. So, I don't know, there was one mayor in France who said, I'm not paying all this money, and he was talking about the city fees, I'm not paying all this money to watch 2 minutes of race and 1 hour of publicity caravan. But the survey shows that actually 50% of the viewers come not just for the show, but actually they come for all this spectacle around. And what publicity caravans are or is basically, it's a string of 50 to 100 cars, and this is basically sponsors of Tour de France that hand out free stuff to viewers alongside the roads, and they give them food, they give them different products, and it's basically a commercial for them, for these companies. Yeah, and I couldn't believe that people actually love this process. But yeah, if you're like there and you're stuck on a road because these roads are obviously closed on that day, it's something to see, it's something to be entertained by. So yeah, these are the two big buckets that go into sponsorships. So again, the main sponsors and then the publicity caravans. So that's 40% of the revenue. Now we switch to the TV rights, which is 55% of the revenue. And so the rights to broadcast Tour de France are sold to 186 countries. So almost every country in the world broadcasts Tour de France, and that leads into why this is the most watched sport in the world. And that, is basically 55%. And we already talked about the 5%, which is the city fees. So cities applying to become either the stage start or stage finish, and then they need to pay between 50 and 150,000 euros for that benefit or that priority. So these are the three big buckets, and now the total number is actually much lower than I expected, honestly. And then Tom, you talked about this is a juggernaut that makes hundreds of millions of euros. Actually, it makes around 100 million euros. So it's not hundreds, it's around. So there's some estimates because, again, ASO, so the holding company, is very private with the numbers, and it's also a private company, so they don't have to be public by French law. So we don't know the exact number, but experts estimate it's around 100 million euros, which, if we take this as a base, means that Tour de France makes only 55 million in TV rights.
Wow.
Which is much less than some other sports.
Far less. Yeah.
Far less. Yeah. So I was really, really surprised by that. I expected this number to be much, much higher.
I think I've seen a few estimates that were maybe overly inflated, which is why I didn't want to give away the number because I knew you'd be coming to it, but I'd seen some up as high as 400 million. But that sounds too high based on what you've said.
Maybe it's still not huge.
It's not huge, is it? You compare it to some other sporting events, especially ones that go on for a month.
Yeah. Maybe it's also these different estimates could be due to the fact that there's a certain sum that the company gets, so ASO, and then there is how much value is created for, I don't know, like all these cities. Yeah. Even though that's probably also more than 400 million.
Yeah.
Probably much more, because I have this quote from... So Denmark was the great departure city a couple of years back, and they paid 4 million euros to be that. And they claim to have received $108 million of economic benefit. Spending.
Need someone new negotiating their contracts at the Tour de France.
Exactly. Like, come on. I mean, you should at least capture 20% of the value you're making.
I think
this is crazy.
There are some Premier League clubs that one Premier League club probably gets more in television rights a year than the Tour de France. And for the amount of eyeballs on it, doesn't seem to quite add up.
No. I was super surprised by that. So if we look now into this company, what are their expenses and income? So we talked about the income, right? But the expenses is it's a really nimble organization because they don't have to pay to use, they do need to pay to use the roads, but this is kind of a yearly fee. They pay to French regions, but they're not paying actually for, hey, we're going to use this road on this day, because the French cities bid and they want it. They actually want the Tour de France to go through these cities. They also don't pay for police. They don't pay for roadblocks. They don't pay for anything that they don't have to pay for. So they pay for their own people, personnel. They pay for in my opinion, very bad prize monies. So, for example, the winner of Tour de France is this year going to get, do you know how much money?
They should be getting an awful lot. Do they break six figures? Surely they do. Surely it's over
Six
100.
figures, yeah. They get $500,000.
$500,000, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen some of the other winners don't get anywhere near that. Some of the other...
Okay, but the thing is, it's a team sport, right? So the winner gets $500,000, but the culture of the sport is such that the winner, so it's called so-called captain in the team, they usually distribute their winnings among the team. So let's say each team has 8 members. So if I want to just divide this 500 divided with 8, I'm basically giving if I'm giving it equally, 62,500 euros to each member of my team, which is, wow, not a lot, right?
I mean, objectively, that's a lot of money. That's more than a lot of people's annual salary. But given the size of the product and the amount of training
but this is winners,
of course.
Yeah, there are 22 teams.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's nuts. I mean, again, comparing it to winners in other sports, one person wins one tour event on the PGA Tour wins like $1.5 million.
Exactly. So this year, the winner of Wimbledon is gonna get 3 million, basically euros or pounds, not sure, which is 6 times as much. And there they keep all the winnings, right? It's a individual sport, and here is a team sport. So it's just crazy. I mean, I had a quick look also at the business of cycling teams, and also that looks really unusual and weird. So basically, they get no revenue share from the broadcast deals with the SEO. They get no revenue share from tickets because there's no tickets. That's another interesting point. So viewers that come to the stadium, I'm doing air quotes here, they don't pay anything, right? So they're part of the spectacle. They are part of the product, so they don't pay. So obviously, there's no revenue to share from this. They also have very little merchandise to sell. It's not like, I don't know, Cristiano Ronaldo goes to Saudi Arabia and now this club sells 1 million of new t-shirts, and that can be hundreds of million in revenue. Here it's like we're talking about thousands of t-shirts sold. So merchandise is not a revenue. So basically each of these teams just has one main so-called title sponsor. So that's why all these teams have really weird names. And sometimes the same team changes the name like from one year to another. Maybe Tom, you may remember Sky Team, and now it's Ineos. It's the same team basically, but it's just a different, it has a different color of the shirts, different name, but same like personnel. Yeah, so owning a cycling team, apart from the commercial itself, not the best business itself, but the Tour de France itself is a good business. It, according to experts, seem to be making like 20% profitability. So let's say if this is 100 million revenue, 20 million in profit, which is okay, But I just wanted to put in perspective how, in terms of revenue, Tour de France is compared to some other sports. So first of all, MBA. So do you want to guess? I mean, actually today is no guessing because all the examples I have are actually far bigger than the Tour de France. But MBA has 10 billion in revenue.
The whole franchise.
The whole league. Yeah, 30 franchises, 10 billion yearly revenue. And big portion coming from the TV rights. And a big portion coming from China also. So the NBA is really good in internationalizing, and they have a lot of games, so it's throughout the year. So there's more product to sell. And Tour de France is 3 weeks. Then we have Champions League, 3 billion.
3 billion?
3 billion in revenue.
That's a bit higher than that.
I had a look at World Cup 2022 revenue. No. I'm just looking for the World Cup Qatar, which is also, let's say, a 3-week event. And it had $6.4 billion USD in revenue. And mostly from TV rights. It's crazy. And then I wanted to find something that's comparable to Tour de France, and that was Wimbledon. So any guess for how much revenue Wimbledon is making? So the tournament itself.
Based on what you've said on the other things that I would have thought a bit bigger, 1.5 billion.
Franz?
One.
It's $440 million. Yeah. Still bigger, right? And it's also a one-time-a-year event. So I'm frankly really, really surprised by the Tour de France's revenue. It seems to be small, and there's either a lot of potential or not.
Very nice summary.
Yes.
Hell, talking of which, have you got any more numbers to
No,
take us through? Because I think that's a good segue into the opportunity and maybe the threat moving forward for Tour de France. And if Tour de France were a stock you could go and buy, whether you'd be buying or selling. So, Franz, I'm going to come to you first because you already mentioned one of the potential threats earlier around doping scandals.
I think we have the biggest threat and biggest opportunity already on the table. So biggest threat being doping scandal again. Biggest opportunity being US Tour de France, for example.
Take it on tour. Tour on tour.
Yeah, take it on tour, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, when thinking about this, not much more came to my mind, honestly. I mean, there's a little bit of safety and security issues. Usually, unsafer sports don't mean less viewers, but paradoxically more viewers. Media could be a threat. I mean, they're making, you said 50% or biggest part of their revenue with broadcasting rights. We all know how broadcasting and TV changes. Frankly, yeah. I think the last thing that keeps TV alive is sports.
Yeah.
So let's see how long that's going to last until also digital takes over. So maybe that's another threat, being or having the fact that TV broadcasting is the biggest revenue stream for them. But apart from that,
would you be buying, holding, selling?
That's so hard because you know how, I mean, some companies already manage to play on emotions, but sports, like researching this, it made me like really, really interested in Tour de France. So, as soon as this happens, you shouldn't buy stuff. You should just enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I would be inclined to say, yeah, buy, because it's so awesome, so much emotions. They're doing so awesome stuff. But as soon as emotions come in, maybe you shouldn't do business there and just enjoy watching
the spectacle, which it definitely is. Be interesting to see how long ago those TV rights were negotiated. I know very often these cycles are very long, but to me that sounds like the biggest opportunity for revenue, given the amount of eyeballs that Alan's already mentioned is on it. Alan, any thoughts on your side? Threats, opportunities?
For threats, there's climate change.
Yes.
So this is a big one. If you have your main race in summer and summer becomes too hot, then this could jeopardize, the whole calendar when the race happens. And if this shifts, then what happens to the TV rights and so on? Then you may be competing with other sports. There's a whole debate, like in the US, they have major leagues, like, there is basketball, there is football, there is baseball. And they try to, very smartly pace themselves so they're not peaking at the same time. So if you need to move the Tour de France from summer to another month, you may be peaking with another sport. So that's a threat, a big one. I think another threat is, like Franz said, maybe another race that could be even more interesting, another cycling race that just is even better for the media format. But I see huge opportunities as well. So huge opportunity for me. What is the nicest way to experience Tour de France? It's being on the road, seeing all those fans, feeling the pain, like when riders are passing you. And what the up and coming Apple Vision Pro promises.
Be there
So
virtually.
imagine I could actually be on, like, there is a 5-hour stage, and I know there's like 3 most important moments. So I could actually teleport myself from one hill to another and just be there in those moments, and be there, like, and maybe even virtually somehow contribute to the noise or whatever. So I think this is a huge potential. But knowing what I know about this leadership team and this company, I think they were super innovative in the beginning, and now they kind of stopped. They missed the social media train. I'm afraid they're gonna miss also now this like whole digital and virtual reality train, or they're gonna be late to it, and this could mean that they're not gonna they're not gonna make use of this opportunity. So, to your question, Tom, buying, holding, selling, I would buy 100% if it's not ASO owning Tour de France anymore. If it's more capable, like if the MBA leaders would take over Tour de France,
Right. You'd be bullish.
this is 10x right away. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been fascinating learning about this today, and just the culture around it, or the fandom is all there, but it feels like it's not being harnessed to its full potential. And maybe that's part of the appeal. I don't know. And
Maybe
that might be part of the formula, that it's not over commercialized. But it feels to me like there's money left on the table for sure. So it would be interesting to see in other hands how that might play out. I think the Vision Pro one is a really interesting one, and I think there might be future opportunities to discuss where that might play in other sports.
NBA.
Might leave that, put a pin in that conversation for now. I had one thing that I thought might be a threat to it. We're starting to see investment from other countries, governments, into sports that have maybe not been already even pay well now, but come in and scoop up lots of high-profile athletes, putting on competitor events very, very quickly. And I guess the thing we're seeing at the moment is cash from Saudi Arabia coming in, particularly like with the golf, spinning up the Live Tour very, very quickly with just eye-watering amounts of money. I wonder if, given we've talked about the lack of prize money and the lack of maybe opportunity being taken by the tour at the moment, whether a rival tour could emerge with that kind of backing. That would be fascinating. I don't know if that's a discussion that's been had at all in the world of cycling so far, Alan.
Not aware of it.
But we've seen them coming for a lot of other sports. So yeah,
it's a good one. Yeah,
interesting. Anything else to add, chaps, on this one? No, it's been really interesting. As someone who didn't know much about the tour going into this, I feel like Franz that I'm going to be tuning in a bit more, and I'm worried about my viewing schedule already, so might be adding the Tour de France in there. It's been really fascinating to touch on that.
And just one tip, you mostly just need to watch the last hour.
Last hour of the whole thing, or each stage?
The best stages.
Okay. What are the best stages? Yeah. Give us a quick rundown of the ones that people should be
you just go
for.
on the letour.fr and you just go through each stage, and if it says mountain stage, you watch it.
Right.
If it says hilly, sometimes it's interesting, sometimes it's not. And if it says flat, then it's a bunch sprint usually in the end. This means it's mostly dudes driving together in a peloton, and then in the end there's a sprint, which is not as interesting. So I usually just watch the mountain stages, and that's usually like, and time trials. Trials super interesting.
Okay.
So that's usually like 8 stages altogether.
Nice.
And they usually happen weekends.
Okay.
So it's only 8 hours of watching.
Yeah, it's not that bad.
Have it on in the background. I mean, yeah, the last hour of each of those. I'm gonna watch some this weekend, and I'll report back whether I fell asleep or not, or switched over. Nice. That's been really, really interesting, and it would be really great to hear from people whether they found this kind of little pivot that we've taken this week into something maybe non-traditional product into sport, what you made of that. If you enjoyed it, suggest some other events or sports that maybe we tear down in future.
Or companies.
And companies,
looking
of course,
for
yeah.
the next few to tear down.
Yes, absolutely. And maybe some niche ones. We like to tear down companies that designers love or gravitate to, but I'm sure there's some that aren't on our radar at the moment. So yeah, drop us a line. That'd be massively appreciated. So Alan, do you want to wrap us up?
Exactly. So last suggestion from our side, if you enjoyed this conversation, you will probably also enjoy our Mini MBA. It's a free email course. So over 7 days, you receive 7 emails, each teaching you a business concept relevant for designers, something you can apply to your work, something that's going to help you also watch Tour de France over the next 7 days. So to sign up, head over to d.MBA/mini MBA. So that's d.MBA/mini MBA. And that is indeed everything, right?
It is. Until next time.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Franz.
See you soon.
See you. Bye.